Hey everyone, this is Louis7, and in this video I will be covering a guide for the Yellow Line Hunter in Lord of the Rings Online. This will be another trait analysis and starter build with the somewhat recently buffed Yellow Line for Hunters. So the spec is a bit odd because it has traditionally been, well, bad, even if I have personally thought it fun to play. So the Hunter was reworked and generally buffed recently, and now the Yellow Line is surprisingly strong and a great choice for solo gameplay, or as you actually see in the background, group content even. Again, it's really odd, but the Yellow Line just has great AoE crowd control and even damage, where in leveling instances and even on the landscape, I feel like content actually goes by really fast in the Yellow Line spec compared to the Blue and Red Line even. Because of that and just the fact that it is the most fun Hunter spec for me to personally play, I decided I would do this guide to show you all how to build it with the starter build and really dive deep with the traits. But I also did just want to inform Hunter players and everybody that it is a great spec that you should consider trying on your Hunter. In addition to the AoE crowd control and damage, it does offer some survivability boost and really allows you to more easily get through tough content if you are having a hard time with some quests or maybe even like soloing some group content landscape areas. Anyway, again, to point out, this is a starter build where I will focus on the first 50 trait points in the Yellow Line. Then after that, I will do some highlighting of some notable traits for when you get more trait points for like a future build. But this will be a detailed analysis of the actual traits, and I will essentially be building out a leveling build to help you get started with the Yellow Line Hunter again and learn how it plays. Moving in game here's the current iteration of my latest build. Just as a note with the Yellow Line, there are so many different options you can choose, not only within the Yellow Line, but where you choose to spend your points after the Yellow Line when you get to about 50 points and onward from there. If you're all the way up to like 94 points, I think 95 is the max right now. But if you have that many points, there are just so many options you could choose in the red and blue line that would be useful, and even some more things in the yellow line. So I did just want to point that out, but I'll go ahead and respec and start from the beginning. So just entering the Yellow Line, you get Lingering Wound, which is going to be your main actual skill. So this one consumes 2 focus and it deals a little bit of damage, but it mainly deals damage over time. It applies a bleed to the enemy, and that can stack up to 4 times. So you keep applying that and the bleed will keep becoming stronger and stronger, and it has a short cooldown, so you'll be using it frequently. The other skill you get is Decoy. At first this does nothing. It's like, well, it actually taunts the enemy, so you'll place this down and enemies will generally attack it because it will taunt them and pull aggro off of you, but otherwise it doesn't do anything at this point. It has a longish cooldown at 30 seconds. The notable feature in the Yellow Line is that you can use your traps while moving and they will have no induction. So like Set Trap, your base trap has a 1-second induction and you can't use it while moving, but once we spec in the Yellow Line, I'll just set trap and it's there instantly. So that's one very big feature of the Yellow Line, being trap focused. And in the first row, we actually can get a new trap called Tripwire, but we also have Hunter damage over time. That is going to be useful because a lot of our damage is based on damage over time, again with Lingering Wound, but even with some traps later in the Yellow Line, as we'll see. We also have Barbed Arrow, which does damage over time and can be used to build focus. And then the third trait in this row increases our defenses with some greatly increased potential on our mitigations, up to 8% physical and tactical, so that's crazy. But one thing I want to point out with my particular build that I'm going to be showing is that I do not opt for the defensive options because I think you can get enough like crowd control and things like that throughout the build that I never really feel the need for the defensive options. But that is there if you want to build a defensive Yellow Line, if you want to like try soloing a lot of tough content, or just need the defensive, they are there, and this physical and tactical mitigation one would be a good trait choice for that. But as far as I would go, I would get Tripwire. That gives you an active trap that will just briefly knock out the enemy. The 5-second knockdown and 5-second knockout are basically the same thing. It's essentially a stun that lasts 5 seconds. The enemy won't be able to do anything, and doing damage won't like get them out of the knockout and knockdown is how that works. And then for the rest of the 4 points, because I'm more damage focused here, I'll get damage over time. Again, a lot of our damage is actually based on damage over time, so that will be nice. And in the our first set bonus rather, this gives deadly decoy, so decoy actually does something now other than taunt enemies, it will actually explode. And just to note, it does this after 15 seconds, so it does it all, well, it takes a long time for it to happen rather, and it also stuns the enemies, but it does a crazy amount of damage. Like, the amount of damage the actual explosion does, especially at low levels, is insane. It will one-shot mobs around level like 20 to 30. And even at my level here, I'm level 112, it does just an insane amount of damage. Speaking of that, I should move my trait panel to its proper position here. But anyway, we can go ahead and get to the second row. And the first one here is going to be dealing with our traps. It decreases the cooldown on them and increases the trap damage. Really big thing with the decreased cooldown is that will affect all of our traps. So like set trap has a 45-second cooldown. It would go down to 30 seconds, so using our traps a lot more often. Tripwire would go down to 15 seconds, and there are going to be more traps in the yellow line that's like insanely effective for. So that's something we definitely want to be putting points in. It also increases damage up to 50%, which is a lot. For something like set trap, which actually does a lot of damage already, increasing that is pretty crazy and will be definitely better. Otherwise, in this row, we have Explosive Arrow, which is an active skill that consumes focus and just does AoE fire damage, and that's pretty much it. It's a pretty fun skill to me. As I said, Yellow Line is my favorite hunter spec in terms of how fun it is, and I'm just super glad it's like actually viable on my hunters. But Explosive Arrow is going to be something we want to get, and it's actually the first thing I would spend in this row. But just to point out, we do have evade chance in this row as well, but we would need to get the mitigation trait from the first row. And again, if you are looking for defenses, evade chance is something the yellow line hunters want, as we'll see with set bonuses and some certain skills, that having evade chance is actually good. And if you are looking to boost your defenses, it's definitely something you would look into, and something I considered if I needed defenses with my builds I was planning out here. But as far as the rest of the points in this row, I would get 4 points in the combat traps, and that'll just help you with your traps a lot as you're going through that. And that unlocks the next row and set bonus. So this set bonus makes set trap, the one here that builds a single trap right in front of you, actually place 3 traps in front of you that all do the same thing as the single trap, so that's pretty crazy. You get triple the effect, and it can affect 3 mobs, and it's just pretty crazy. You could also affect the same mob 3 times, but that'd take a really long time because the trap itself lasts 30 seconds, and it does break on damage, so you could line it up to do a ton of damage on one mob from that trap. But that is how that works. And the next trait in this row, the first trait in this row rather, is Rain of Thorns. So this one's interesting. It costs 6 focus, it has 11 targets, which is a lot, and it has a 1-minute cooldown, but it's like Rain of Arrows from the red line. I think it does the same damage, it looks like, exactly, but it has a longer cooldown just comparing the two, and it costs 1 more focus, but it also roots the enemy, so you can have an insane amount of crowd control on 11 enemies, rooting them for 30 seconds, and it even has a relatively low chance to break on damage. 25% isn't that much, so that's definitely something to get. And just to note, more ranks in that would just increase the damage of it, because it has a long cooldown and doesn't do like an insane amount of damage on its own. Unless I'm doing a ton of AoE on my character, I wouldn't put the extra ranks in that unless there are no other good options for traits. But just to look at the next trait in this row, we have Explosive Powder, which increases Deadly Decoy and Explosive Arrow damage. This goes up to 20% at rank 5, and as I mentioned, Deadly Decoy does a ton of damage, and Explosive Arrow does a good amount of damage, and increasing that by 20% will definitely help with its damage, make it essentially do a ton of damage after that. So that's definitely something we're going to want to put points in. But the other trait in this row is called Endurance, and just to note on the stance, that affects Endurance stance and will give you extra parry and evade chance. So Endurance stance at baseline already gives a little bit of evade and parry, and then a lot of evade for 10 seconds once you activate it, and it also reduces range skill power cost. But the thing with Yellow Line Hunter is, as a defensive stat, evade rating is good, but I really like precision stance. Unless I actually need the survivability, I'm not really an endurance stance. Precision stance is good because it does give finesse. It also gives a bow critical multiplier, but also the focus every 5 seconds is just a generally nice thing. And as far as strength stance goes, that does give a lot of critical rating and some induction and focus bow damage, but it's not worth it compared to what precision stance gives, especially with the focus. It's just a nice thing to use, and even the critical multiplier actually helps a lot, even in the yellow line. So as far as spending points now, what I would actually recommend is getting Rain of Thorns, but because combat traps is so crazy with decreasing the cooldown of the traps by 3 more seconds and getting even more trap damage, I would actually do 1 point in that. But comparing the deadly, decoy, and explosive arrow damage to damage over time, I would say damage over time is your main component of damage, but if you are in any sort of long fights, if every fight you go through you're not using any of your damage over time skills, you could just put points in the deadly, decoy, and explosive arrow damage. But from my experience, I would go ahead and finish out natural extracts there, and then start putting points in explosive powder. And again, just to note on Rain of Thorns, that I don't think it's quite worth putting more points in that unless you are in a situation where you're doing a ton of AoE, but even just these two compared, explosive powder would be more useful overall, I think. But that brings us to the next set bonus in row. And this set bonus adds additional effects to our traps. So triple trap will give a plus 15% incoming damage debuff. That's pretty crazy for a trap that already does a lot of damage. It'll even affect mobs that don't actually get stuck in the trap, it'll still debuff them, so that's pretty good. And then piercing trap, I don't believe we have that one now, if I'm correct. Yeah, piercing trap is going to actually be a trait in this row. That one will restore morale to people who hit the target, which is going to be nice for survivability, not only of you, but anybody in your fellowship or group, or just anybody that hits them. It kind of plays to the little bit of support theme that the Yellow Line Hunter actually has. And then the other one is Deadly Decoy will give plus 10% incoming critical chance debuff when that goes off. So just adds an additional effect to that already strong skill. For the traits in this row, we have this one which decreases trap resistance penetration. Rather, the other way around, it increases trap resistance penetration. It decreases the chance that your trap would be resisted is essentially how that works. So just to note, your finesse should cover resistance of enemies, so this one doesn't seem too appealing just based off of that, but it is something we could consider if we have extra points and don't need survivability. Otherwise in this row we have advanced placement, which just changes the entire flow of Yellow Line Hunter gameplay. So this actually makes all of your traps ranged ground targeted skills. I will point out that some hunters might actually find this annoying and not want their traps to be ground targeted, but overall it is definitely going to be something effective just to give you more versatility in how you use your traps. I could use my set trap and target it at that mortar or guard there and just have him trapped where he is. It's pretty effective to do that, but the main reason it would be annoying is if you're trying to ground target it and you target it at yourself, it'll actually stay too close and it's kind of annoying. On top of that, you do have to press your button twice, and that can even be a little bit annoying. It's the same reason the rune stones on the Runekeeper, sometimes having them ground target is just a little bit annoying because of that, but it does make up for that and just how useful it is to have them ground targeted. But anyway, that's definitely going to be something we're going to want. So we also have piercing trap in this row, which is going to be very valuable. It's a strong damage over time trap that will slow the enemy, and it has a 45-second cooldown. Just to note, this one actually costs 1 focus. Tripwire doesn't cost any focus and doesn't give any, but set trap actually adds a lot of focus, so this is a little bit different. It's a focus consuming trap, but that one's going to be useful to get. So at this point you really have to consider for yourself if you'd rather another trap that deals damage over time, or would you rather be able to ground target your traps? Some people probably want to ground target their traps right away and just fling them off in the distance because that's pretty fun. But I personally would go ahead and get piercing trap just to get the damage over time in the new trap, and then I would get the points in advanced placement. And just to note on the maximum range, we can actually apply this and look at what the maximum range of the traps looks like, and right now you can't really. So the range on the trap is pretty short because I'm not using explosive arrow this time. and the more points in this will increase the range on that. So I definitely think that's useful, and as far as the next 2 points, it is something I would get. If you don't find you need the increased range on the traps, you don't have to put the points in there at that order, but that's what I'm going to do for my hunters at this point. And then for the rest of the points in this row, as we mentioned, the trap resistance penetration isn't going to be that great. So I would go ahead and go back and get the explosive powder. And we only needed 1 point in that to unlock the next row and set bonus. So the next set bonus plays into the crowd control part of Hunter, and it gives plus 5% fear duration and minus 5% fear resist. Well, you only have one fear, and that's not it. It's Bard's Arrow. So that has a 15-second fear. This would make it 20-second fear, and just less likely that enemies will resist it. So just good to know on that Bard's Arrow is slightly more fearful. But the trait in this row is a little bit odd because it makes penetrating shot debuff the target's block, parry, and evade rating like it says, but in the stats it says it debuffs their mitigation and tactical mitigation. Well, that's not actually how it works. It only does the block, parry, and evade because by default now, penetrating shot already debuffs enemy physical and tactical mitigation by 4%. And I did test this, and the trait does not actually affect that. It only does the block, parry, and evade. And just like the resistance rating, you should actually have the block, parry, and evade covered through your finesse. Finesse will reduce block, parry, and evade by approximately a total of, for me, 18.7%. But the point is that your finesse should cover that. So I don't think putting a bunch of points in armor range is going to be that useful because, again, even for people like in your group, if you're running with a fellowship, that's not going to be the most impactful. And also to note the numbers on that, the actual BPE that it affects is not that much. So it's not really going to be too useful. So that means at this point we're going to have to look back at traits previous in this row, and explosive powder was the other one we were working on, so I'll go ahead and put 2 more points in that. And this is the point you really have to decide what you want out of the Yellow Line Hunter. As far as defenses go, I would recommend the mitigation trait survival gear at the top right, and if you want increased AoE damage, you could put more points in Rain of Thorns, and if you just want general assurance that your traps will actually hit, you could do complex mechanisms and get the increased trap resistance penetration. So as far as my experience goes, if you have your finesse where you want it, at low levels you probably don't, then you don't really need this. But if you don't have your finesse, if it's a little bit low, not like up to the 20 to 30% range, this could actually have some use just because of that. It'll be less likely that enemies resist it. So that is a nice thing. Otherwise, if you are completely fine on finesse, you could definitely skip that and just get increased mitigation. Definitely make you more survivable, and that also bring you a little bit closer to elusive if you wanted that with the evade chance. And again, we'll see why with a set bonus later that evade chance is particularly good with Yellow Line Hunter. But moving on, that does unlock the next row and set bonus. Here's the set bonus. So this one actually shows why evade is good. So when you evade an enemy attack or even partially evade, you get minus 5-second cooldown on all of your traps. So if you have all your traps on cooldown and then you evade an enemy, you can just use your traps even more quickly. And even like Tripwire, that would go down to effectively a 10-second cooldown if you evade an enemy while that's on. So that's pretty crazy if you do evade enemies, and that also means in a way that you're taking damage and enemies attacking you. You evade it and then you get increased survivability in a way because then you can just trap them because your traps are off cooldown quicker. And on top of that, this trait itself will just increase your evade chance by 5% and also give you more stealth detection. That's a little bit of an on what I guess the trait's called heightened senses. So it will give you the increased stealth detection and just the plus 5% evade chance. So a nice thing, evading more enemy attacks. A lot of things going on with that, that's nice. But for the traits in this row, we have one that improves distracting shot. It will decrease the cooldown by up to a minute and give a plus 2-second days grace period. So distracting shot, this does a 10-second daze on a 3-minute cooldown. It does add 3 focus, just to note. It also has a 1.5-second induction, so a little bit slow. And with that trait, it would actually have a 2-second period where you could damage enemies and it wouldn't break. And on top of that, I think it said decrease cooldown. That was the other one. That's right. So you could get it down to a 2-minute cooldown, but you have so many other options for crowd control, even your fear. This is your only true long daze, but I just don't think it's worth putting the 2 points in improved distracting shot. But if you are finding yourself wanting more use out of your distracting shot, you do want to daze enemies for longer and want shorter cooldown on that, I would go ahead and put the points in this if you want that. Otherwise, I will not be doing that for this particular starter build. But the other trait in this row is Merciful Shot. That does additional damage if Lingering Wound is on the enemy, and it will consume the bleed. So Lingering Wound, again, is our main skill. We'll be using that a lot. It costs 2 focus, and you just build that bleed up over time in combat naturally, using it as kind of your primary focus consumer, along with Explosive Arrow and even improved Penetrating Shot here, and Merciful Shot as well. But this will actually, again, make Merciful Shot consume the bleed, and I tested this quite a bit, and a lot of things like this that consume bleeds in LOTRO are actually not good, because usually bleeds and damage over time effects just in the game in general are very strong, and things that consume them are not really worth using. But I did test this, and it does a few bleed ticks worth of damage from Lingering Wound, so it can be useful to use Merciful Shot if you have this trait just to get some burst damage with Lingering Wound, especially if Lingering Wound is about to go off. It'll actually definitely increase your damage, and again, the immediate burst damage is going to be nice from that, so I do think that will be worth the point. And as far as other things in this row, we are kind of running out of things to put points in that affect like our damage anyway, so I would go ahead and get that. And then for the other points, again, don't want to improve distracting shot for my build, don't need armor end. So I'd actually go ahead, I guess, and get 2 more in complex mechanisms. And again, if I had my finesse all the way up, if like this particular character just had a lot, I would not need this. But otherwise, I need to spend some more points to get to the last row, and I think it is, yeah, 2 more points to get to the last row. So I would just do survival gear. Again, if you need AoE, you have Rain of Thorns and all that. So we can go ahead and move on since I've covered that a lot. So this one is pretty crazy. Also plays to the support role that Yellow Line Hunters actually have a little bit in group content. This one is Purge Poison, now affects your fellowship. And Purge Poison is a short cooldown skill that removes 2 debuffs from the target, or in this case it'll now affect the whole fellowship, and it gives increased poison resistance rating. So on a short 5-second cooldown, it'll make you very effective at removing debuffs of allies, and that's a pretty crazy set bonus to just like significantly boost your support ability in a fellowship. So that's definitely a nice thing to have, and keep in mind if you are running group content on the Yellow Line Hunter that you can remove debuffs from the entire fellowship very easily with that. But anyway, to look at the traits in this row, we have the One Trap, which decreases the enemy run speed but does a lot of initial damage. With my numbers, it's about 13,000, which is a lot of damage, and it does a lot of damage over time for a long duration. On top of that, the trap itself only has a 30-second cooldown, and I will say it does cost 3 focus, so it's another focus-consuming trap, but it's really insane with how much damage it does, and it kind of effectively works like Triple Trap when it was only 1 trap, and this is now called the One Trap, so it's kind of like that, but also with the damage over time component, it does consume focus instead of build focus and slows the enemy. So that's going to be nice to get, but let's look at the other trait in this row to be safe. So this one is you save a trap for when you are most threatened. This is evading will place a single trap in front of you. It's the same trap, again, as set trap, which is now called Triple Trap. But that'll place one of these traps whenever you evade an enemy, and that can only occur once every 8 seconds. But if you're in combat and evading enemies, you will just be like placing traps like crazy with that over time. And even though that's more of a defensive thing, if you're never actually taking damage from enemies, if you're like keeping them trapped and staying far away where you're never taking damage, even your explosive decoy, if that's decoying you from enemies, you won't actually evade the enemy attacks, and perhaps this trait wouldn't be useful because of that. But it is emergency preparations, as it says, so I do think it will be worth the point, but I would definitely get the One Trap first and then put the point on that. So at this point you can backfill to potentially try and get sturdy traps very quickly, because that will be crazy. So at this point, if you are leveling just to show, I would have to put 3 points in, say, the red line. That's actually not what I would do, but just to show, for example, I would have to do 3 traits in the red line, and that would actually cost 6 of my class trait points because I'm going in the other line. Or I could just put 3 points in the yellow line and unlock sturdy traps. So it's kind of a tough decision, because you have to think maybe while leveling you'd really like to get sturdy traps because it is an insane set bonus, and we'll get to that in a minute on why. So you might want to put like 3 more points in the yellow line just to get that real quickly. But then you also have to consider maybe you don't want those 3 points in the yellow line anymore after you have a bunch of points like I do, and you would go like with your regular build, perhaps going in the blue line, and you would have to respec for that. Just something to consider. But as far as like the leveling experience on my hunter goes, the way I would do it is put 3 points in survival gear and unlock the set bonus, and we'll go over why now finally. So the little part of the set bonus is you get increased traps grace period. As we mentioned, the grace period is like for the 50% chance break on damage, you have like a 5-second period where you can do all the damage and it won't break, and then you'll have that 50% break chance on damage. And it's the same thing with the other traps. Actually, I think that's the only one with a real grace period, but anyway, that's what that does. But the big thing is you will have no focus loss on movement, so that functions just like the blue line hunter. They don't lose focus on movement, and now you as a yellow line hunter will not lose focus on movement, because one thing you'll probably see me doing in the gameplay a lot is moving. You can run around and just be mobile on the yellow line. Even on my low level hunter, who the background gameplay was on, I move a lot on the yellow line just because it's very easy to be mobile. You have a lot of things you can use while moving that are instant cast, even traps and things like that. So not losing focus during those movement periods is going to significantly help you keep your focus up while moving. And that's really why that set bonus is very good, and why you want to, I think, spend the 3 trait points in the yellow line for that. And just to note, I did put my 3 points in the mitigation just because there isn't anything I personally would rather for my experience. Again, AoE damage, Rain of Thorns always there. But at this point, I would actually... So continuing the build, I would go for my build in the blue line. I guess this is a little bit odd structure, but ultimately I would actually rebuild the hunter after I had enough trait points. So where I actually had enough trait points, it looks like 38 points spent. That is when I would just rebuild the hunter, just like respecialize and redo this, and only put 2 points in survival gear, and then start putting points in other lines, because that'll be more efficient. And at least, again, I'm not doing a really defensive build on this character here, and that would get the next set bonus. But to talk about future traits in the build, rather notable traits for further in the build. So one thing you could consider in the red line is Rain of Arrows for AoE damage. That's quite a bit in the red line and would be a big investment there, but there are a lot of things on the way that red line would help with, because you just naturally use a bunch of different skills in the yellow line. You have a little bit of induction that you use, you have a lot of instant stuff you use with focus consumers like Merciful Shot, Lingering Wound, and just a lot of things like that. So a lot of things in the red line, even like critical chance, would just be a flat thing to help. And even you have a lot of damage over time theme in the yellow line, so something like Heartseeker could be good. But you also have some things to consider in the blue line, something like Exsanguinate. That does the damage over time and would be nice to get. You also get more survivability out of Blood Arrow, so that would be really nice. On top of that, you could even go all the way down to Precision and get increased focus generation with that. So there are really a lot of things. Also, there's Hunter damage over time in the blue line. There's even Press Onward for some morale restore and power restore, more survivability. And even Split Shot for even more AoE, because yellow line really is the AoE hunter in a way, even though red line actually has decent AoE damage. I'd say decent as in like relatively decent for the hunter. Some Rain of Arrow spam can briefly provide you with some good damage, but the point is that you can like further boost the yellow line's AoE damage with Split Shot if you wanted. That will cost focus, and it won't do quite as much damage as Explosive Arrow overall. It actually has a wider range. But it's just something to consider, and there are really a lot of things depending what you want. If you really want Heartseeker, you want something strong that can deal a bunch of damage to a single target up front and then a lot of damage over time, you could go all the way to Heartseeker. Again, you could do Rain of Arrows further in the red line, and there are just a bunch of random traits here. Induction bow damage wouldn't be too bad, it wouldn't be super helpful. Swift bow, I probably don't use that too much at all in the yellow line. You could do quick shot to reduce bow inductions. You do use quick shot just to build focus in the yellow line even. Even getting something like penetrating shot, increased critical chance would be good. And the regular base critical chance, that one's good. Merciful shot, you use that, you consume the lingering wound debuff with that, so that would be good. And burn hot, of course, increasing your damage, that would be good. Reducing skill inductions, of course, that would be good, even though, again, you're trying to use your instant cast stuff most of the time, but just a lot of things. I hope this is really making sense. I covered the blue line a little bit with that, but just to really, I guess, thoroughly go over that, how many different things you can do with the yellow line, so flexible with all the options. But for my personal build on this character, I want to get split shot for even more AoE, something very easy to get for more AoE. I also get press onward to have that extra security of having an actual heal. Even though I have a ton of crowd control and survivability, I don't have something that can actually heal myself, so I like having that. And as far as the first row in the blue line, I do prefer flat damage rather than damage for just skills that consume focus, because the flat damage, actually that's range damage, that doesn't even affect traps, that totally like negates my point actually. So upon further review, as you all probably just heard, I totally misread this trait. Even though I just did the blue line, I knew what it did, it just didn't really register. So I would actually do damage for skills that consume focus over just flat range damage, because as far as range damage goes, not including your trap or explosive decoy, a lot of your damage will be from skills that consume focus. You have lingering wound, you do have explosive arrow, even penetrating shot, again merciful shot, even rain of thorns. Those all consume focus, and you do have like barbed arrow that does the bleed, that's regular range damage, and quick shot and all that. But as far as the magnitude, you get 25% increased damage on your strongest skills versus 5% on everything. I think the 25% will be better, now that I reread that correctly. Anyway, we have, as far as this build, for a starter build, I like to do 50 points spent, so I would actually spend 4 more points and try to find something to spend on. So one thing I would do is actually 1 more point in strong draw, which will spend 2 of our points. And what that does is, using a skill that costs focus, that'll have a 15% chance to reduce the focus cost for your next skill by 5%. What this does is, using a skill that costs focus will have a 15% chance to reduce the focus cost for your next skill. Or rather, not just your next skill, but for 8 seconds you'll have -1 focus cost for skills. So if you're consuming focus a lot, trying to do that with lingering wound, explosive air, all that stuff I keep going over, that will be a nice thing. So as far as my build goes, I have 2 more points to spend, and I would probably start from there. I would actually continue in the blue line, only if I had enough points to get Exsanguinate, but just because I don't have anything personally on my character with only 4 more points available to get anything like super valuable out of the blue line, I'd actually just get flat critical chance, and this would be the 50 trait point starter build. But otherwise, for the last 2 points my character has, I'll just get more crit chance again. And that will be my build and what I will show the gameplay with. And the gameplay is going to be crazy because there are just so many things to show, and this is the same place I did the blue line hunter gameplay, and there's just so many things to show here. So hopefully with the yellow line hunter, this does make a little bit sense as far as the gameplay goes. And we can go ahead and get started on that now. So first thing is explosive decoy. I'll just run into these 2 mobs. I'm not even using my trap. So there's the 1 trap that'll go down there. There's the 3 traps, and they're all trapped. They're not going to do anything. There's the knockout one. When explosive decoy actually does its damage, we can see how strong it is, hopefully. So yeah, it did a decent chunk of damage. It does relatively more at low levels again. But yeah, that's that was just spamming a bunch of traps. So obviously you don't always want to do that, because some of your traps do different things. Like if I actually organize my traps here, I would use tripwire at least, because that's just a knockdown. And then these two, I'd probably have the one trap there because I would consider using it more than piercing trap. So the one trap will go, and then I can root somebody that comes here, use explosive arrow, lingering wound, and now I'm just really trying to build focus. One thing is split shot. That would actually have been a time to use that. I'm not going to use it now, but one thing y'all are probably not seeing too much is the damage over time component of the Yellow Line Hunter. It's just, again, a little bit hard for me to exactly showcase the gameplay here without doing it for like 30 minutes. It seems like I would finally show everything then. But as far as this fight goes, I'm going to try and do it more normal. I'm actually going to use a trap there, kite a little bit. Again, I can run away and not get... Wow, I actually died. I didn't even pay attention to my morale. That's pretty bad in a guide to not be paying attention to something like that, and now all my armor is damaged. But I hope this is showcasing at least how the yellow line plays a little bit. And I did not give the context for my character's gear, so I do take a ton of increased damage in this specific area because my Light of Arundel is real bad. But that's one of the things with the Yellow Line Hunter. If I actually properly used my traps and wasn't trying to show gameplay without using traps, that would be something I could do. So if I get into the next fight, I'll show Rain of Thorns just to show that. Let's see, restore. Oops, did not mean to use intent concentration. I was just going to gather some focus, and I'll restore my morale now. But I will put a few traps down just to prepare for this fight, since I am going to pull two signatures and I'm low on morale, and I'll actually bleed both of them, but with the grace period on the traps, hopefully shouldn't have a problem with that. And I do need to actually build a ton of, I was going to call it attunement, that's the Runekeeper thing, a ton of focus, and actually killed that one signature, just the traps and overall damage I was doing. I was just trying to build focus for Rain of Thorns, and then he died from my stuff. That's really the way the Yellow Line Hunter, I think, plays out usually. So I do need to restore some power heal. I'll just use a potion, but this is a way you can set up your traps. The particular recommended order I would do is your damaging traps first is an option. So the one trap, I mean the damage over time ones, and piercing trap, and then you follow it up with triple trap, so they get actually trapped rooted after they go to your damaging traps. Another option is to do the one trap, and then when the one trap, not the one trap, triple trap, when that breaks, ooh, I leveled up. When triple trap breaks, you can put them into the damaging traps. That's what I did with the two back there. But just to showcase the damaging traps first, and then I'll do the one trap. Let's see how that goes. So I'll do all my damage, and then he gets to the set trap, and unfortunately with the whole running through that taking damage the whole time, he didn't actually get rooted. So that's why normally if you're really looking to root them, I would put the triple trap closer to you. Hold up, the other way around, closer to the mob, and then have your damaging traps behind it. I'll go ahead and show that. This is actually, there are a bunch of orcs here, so a good time to show that. So I'd have like triple trap there, and then the damaging ones behind it for when the enemies get to that, and I'll go ahead and hit that Mordor guard. I think it hit two of them, so this would be a good time to do Rain of Thorns. Oh, I have more mobs hitting me. This is actually not a good situation, and I will get explosive decoy out. Don't have press onward off cooldown, but I do want to kill this one Mordor warrior, and I already have the trap off cooldown, so I can use it again. That's again one of the crazy things going on. I need to remove my debuffs, and I can't do that while moving. I didn't know I was moving. I'm going to use a potion just to be safe. But yeah, that is one of the crazy things with Hunter, is how quickly the traps reset cooldown. So I'm going to take care of the signature guard. There are some other signatures heading my way, but I think they're mainly covered by the traps. He's just running into stuff. You'll probably hear me clattering on the keyboard, a little bit frantic that fight, but I think that really showcased, that was a good fight to showcase how the Yellow Line Hunter can play out with the traps and crowd control, and just to extend a fight where I accidentally pulled an extra signature and mob. And I know this gameplay section is like extra long, but I just feel like there's so many things to cover. Like I should have used Rain of Thorns there. Now they should be rooted, but I'm not entirely sure that actually worked as it was. Seemed like it should have, but it's okay. So I'll try one more fight here, like if you got into an unexpected fight like this. That would be a good time to just trap them and run away a little bit. Even range mobs, there aren't any range mobs here that I can show this, but that knockdown trap tripwire can be good for that. So like melee mobs, of course you can use your trap and root them and they can't attack you because you'll be too far away, but range mobs can still attack you in that, and one thing good with tripwire is that will actually block that. It's a 5-second knockout one. So just to point that out as I'm thinking about it here. But in general, I hope this little bit of gameplay is helping. I will do a little bit more, but sometimes when I'm talking about everything, I don't actually pay attention to what I'm doing in the game, as y'all can probably tell. So just a little bit more of what maybe like my normal gameplay would look like here. Having a little bit of funky lag. So I did not even see this work, so this is a time I could use explosive decoy if he is actually a dangerous mob, but it looks like I did pull another signature, so that's actually good. I'm gonna use split shot, or try to use split shot, accidentally use swift bow. Use power potion because I'm running low on that, and really the explosive decoy was keeping the guard distracted, and there it just stunned him, but then he died from my damage over time and traps. So this time I'll use a bunch of my damaging traps. And even my knockout one for when I move back here. And I got him, I didn't get him killed, I just accidentally tab targeted, but that's okay, he got killed from my damage over time effects. Blood arrow actually restored some morale there. I don't think I've been too focused. One thing I haven't actually done is shown you all merciful shot with how it works. So it actually says the damage if lingering wound is present. It does basically double the damage it already does, and it actually does more damage based off the tier. Y'all probably also just saw there was a trap that appeared. That's because I evaded the enemy attack, and unfortunately that warrior got me killed while I was trying to show off the lingering wound and merciful shot. But that is actually a good point to wrap it up, because again, that gameplay section has been extra long. So I just really hope that helped, and especially gave some extra context with the Yellow Line Hunter gameplay, because again, it is pretty complex and just something a little bit maybe extra hard to get started on. There's just so much going on with it, especially jumping in at this level with this many trait points. But anyway, as far as Yellow Line Hunter goes, again, it's my favorite hunter spec, and that's why I wanted to go ahead and do a build with it and just share with y'all how fun and how actually viable, as you probably saw in the gameplay, that it is. And even kills mobs and even large groups of mobs just really good with the AoE crowd control, AoE damage even, which you've probably seen more in the background gameplay, which hasn't been too much, that's at the beginning and end. But anyway, as far as this goes, I hope you all did like the build and the guide and were able to learn something from it. And if you did enjoy it and learn something useful, please consider liking and subscribing for more, or becoming a channel member to support the content, and thanks for watching, everyone.